On Life and Meaning is brought to you by Blumenthal Performing Arts, celebrating its 25th year presenting the best in the performing arts, sharing and employing the arts as a major catalyst to strengthen education, building community cohesiveness, and advancing economic growth. Further support is provided by Foundation for the Carolinas, inspiring philanthropy and empowering individuals to create a better community. And by the Arts and Science Council, Charlotte-Mecklenburg's resource hub and lead advocate for the regional cultural community, providing culture for all.
We still work with the assumption that everybody will have a job. We still raise our kids and educate our students with the idea that their job is their identity. What if that's taken away from them? Who are they? And that can be devastating. And the increase in suicide, for example, is really a reflection of that. And we can all bury our head in the sand and pretend that nothing is happening and that eventually things will even out. But I don't think we should be doing that. I think we should really be addressing, debating, discussing these issues. I don't have the answer to them, but I think it's very important for us as higher education institutions to be debating these.
Fatma Mili is Dean of the College of Computing and Informatics at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Before joining the faculty at UNC Charlotte in 2017, Fatma was a professor of computer science at Purdue University, where she was the founder and director of the Center for Trans-Institutional Capacity Building and Educational Equity in STEM at the Purdue Discovery Park. She founded the Purdue Polytechnic Institute, an academic educational research institute to foster modern transdisciplinary education. Her interests include spearheading new curricular innovations to equip students to shape the future. In this episode, we explore computer science education, whether artificial intelligence is giving rise to tyranny, the data industrial complex, and the values and mindsets we need to create and manage disruption. I'm Mark Paris, and this is On Life and Meaning. Fatma, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Mark.
Fatma, how do you describe the College of Computing and Informatics at UNC Charlotte?
It's one of the largest colleges of computing, and that's usually one of the first qualifier that people bring to the picture, but it has so much more than its size. It's one of the most innovative colleges in the country, and that's really what I found the most appealing about it. Another important characteristics for the College of Computing and Informatics at UNC Charlotte is the fact that it does not choose between extensive research and commitment to teaching. It's a college that excels in both, and that's so unique.
How is it innovative?
It's innovative in so many ways. First of all, it always comes down to people. The collection of people who are in the College of Computing and Informatics, each one of them is so unique, such an independent thinker. And I often wonder what makes a place attract such people. And it starts somewhere and then they keep attracting each other. So for example, in a market that is extremely challenging, where we are not producing enough Ph.D.s in computing, in the last 2 years we were able to hire 24 faculty members. That is amazing. The Computing Research Association keeps track of how many searches we have every year, the different universities and how many they hire, and half of the searches fail. Yet here we are in North Carolina, we bring in 24 new people. So the candidates that we have who come for interview feel it. They feel that this is a different place. It's young. That's what makes it innovative. It's progressive. The mission of the university is different. So the Education in the College of Computing and Informatics is very innovative. We have a Center for Educational Innovation within the college. I don't think any other college has that. So that's how much we care about education and how much we don't see it as routine. It's really a research problem. The classroom is a laboratory. The research that the faculty do is also extremely innovative, and I will just mention one thing. In terms of the citations of the faculty in the college, we are 13 in the country. We have the highest number of citations, which means that people around the country find the research that our faculty do interesting enough that they read it and that they cite it. So right now the college has 3 different departments. The Department of Computer Science, which is the traditional computer science department. Software Information Systems, which right now has 2 areas of signature, which are human-centered design and cybersecurity. The Department of Bioinformatics and Genomics, which is really using and developing computational tools for genomics and biology. So these are the 3 current departments. There is also the Data Science Initiative, that is university-wide initiative that is right now being transformed into a School of Data Science that will be housed in the College of Computing and Informatics, but also will be in collaboration with all of the other colleges around campus.
And what do you do as dean of the college?
That's a trick question. So I will give you the answer that I gave during my interview, which is one of the important functions of a dean is to be the storyteller in chief. It's setting the vision, it's bringing in resources, and it's really weaving that story that defines what our identity is. And there is this story, I don't know where it comes from, but it tells of somebody who walks in the street and sees people digging. And he stops the first one and says, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm digging dirt." He asks the second one, "What are you doing?" He said, "I'm working to feed my family." And asks the third one, "What are you doing?" He said, "We're building a cathedral." And that's the difference that the story makes. And in a way, this is my 2nd year in the College of Computing and Informatics. And to me, that is something that is very important in the sense that we spent the first year really figuring out what are the big lines in our story. Who are we? We intentionally did not want to do strategic planning where we put some numbers and say by 2030 we want to have X% or X number of students. We felt it is much more important to start by thinking, who are we and who do we want to be? And that translated in terms of 3 values. So we spelled out these 3 values and spent the year discussing them. In fact, we're not done. We continue to do that because a value is not something that you put on a wall and forget about it. If it doesn't translate into actions, if it doesn't impregnate everything that you do, then it doesn't mean anything. And it was very important for the whole college to be basically actors and agents in that same story. And for them to do that, they need to translate the values and figure out what's my role in this.
What are those 3 values?
The first one, we acknowledge that there is inequity and we pledge to do everything in our power to change that.
What kind of inequity?
Everything. Inequity in education, inequity in housing, inequity in the world. They come as a surprise in the sense that these are very broad statements, but the key statement is really, first of all, we acknowledge that they're there. And the second thing is we do everything in our power to change that. And the first reaction, the surface reaction we all have is, I have nothing to do with it. But that's not true.
The first value is inequity. What is the second?
The second value is we understand the impact of technology on society and ethics, and we own that impact. So as scientists, as engineers, as technologists, we tend to take pride, get our energy from producing these things and putting them out in the world and leaving it for others to decide what their impact is. And their impact is huge. Their impact very often is some intended and some unintended consequences. And in a way, we are changing the face of the earth, but nobody gave us that permission. And very often our students, our graduates, our researchers don't give a second thought to that. And in the college, we are putting that center in everything that we do, that when we produce something, thinking of not only the stockholders, but who are the stakeholders, how does it affect them before we do anything else? And we do that in education as well as in research. So in education, most curricula tend to have 3 credits of ethics. And then we get to the accreditation time, and the question is, do your students have ethics? And we check the box, we say yes. But when it comes to practice, when we are doing projects, when they are actually producing anything, nobody ever asks them anything. So there are 2 components that need to be in place. One of them is equipping the students with the cognitive tools of thinking about these questions, of asking the questions. And the second one is the habit of mind. It has to become a reflex. It cannot be an afterthought sometimes when something comes up in the news. That's the second value.
And the third value?
The third value is to switch from ego thinking and feeling and sensing and acting to eco sensing and acting.
Eco as an ecosystem.
Eco as the whole group, the whole community versus me. So going from competition to collaboration. And this is also a complete paradigm shift. That's also another thing in ABET. ABET is the engineering accreditation agency. Also, do your students have teamwork and collaboration? We check the box. Oh yeah, they did a team project. But in fact, we tend to send lots of hidden messages that what we want you is to compete. We want you to be looking for your own interest, we want you to be the best. And it's a completely different way of thinking, of perceiving, of sensing than the competitive mode.
Fatma, these values are a perfect segue to what I'd like to talk about with you, which is the world of computing and informatics, how it's evolving, and its implications for society and education. Let's start with some basic terms. What is informatics?
Informatics is used in Europe. It has a different meaning than it has here. Informatics is really the use of information theory for different applications. In Europe, informatics is the same thing as computer science. Here it's used whenever it has an applied context.
Is informatics the same as the term big data, which is a common popular term?
No, big data is a subdiscipline. The term big data emerged in different ways. Very often we use it with data analytics, machine learning, machine intelligence. And there are different phases of development in artificial intelligence. And the most commonly used today is the area of machine learning in the context of using large amount of data in order to detect patterns.
And that is the area that I want to focus in on. There's a lot of general interest in artificial intelligence, machine learning, and its connection to big data. The term artificial intelligence, is it the same as machine learning?
The connotations may be slightly different. Artificial intelligence is a term that emerged in the 70s, maybe, where the ambition was to make machines as intelligent as human. I don't know that that ambition completely disappeared, but when we talk about machine learning, it's much more technology. It's how do we make this algorithm learning this specific process. That's quite different from saying that something is smart or is intelligent. In a way, I can take a system and make it learn to, let's say, identify the most promising approach in doing something without it being smart. It's really gaining some efficiency and learning all the patterns in the data that allow us to do something. And it tends to be specialized. So machine learning, as it is used around a city, around the country, it's really very specialized. I want to have this algorithm do this in a very efficient, effective way. And that's completely different from intelligence. Intelligence, in the beginning, the research in artificial intelligence was, how do we create programs that can solve any problem?
Where are we right now in the development of artificial intelligence?
In some ways, progress has been much, much faster than we expected it to be. In some other aspects, we are still struggling with the same problem. Again, the general intelligence, having a system that is general purpose like humans, we're still far from that. Focusing on a specific task and having a program that does it much better than any humans, we're far than we ever thought we would be. And very often what we see is these very specialized programs. Creating a specialized program to do almost anything very well. We have made lots of progress, and we can do that for almost any application for which we have enough data.
Is it fair to say we are quite advanced in machine learning, but not quite as advanced in artificial intelligence?
That sounds good.
Is there a difference between intelligence and consciousness?
That's almost a philosophical question. I think it is. I think they are two different problems. And I think in science fiction, very often they are equated. And anytime there is a machine that has enough intelligence, something switches and it becomes conscious and it takes initiative and it becomes self-aware. I don't know that we know enough about what self-awareness is to equate that with intelligence, and I'm afraid it takes me out of my area of expertise to discuss what consciousness is. But the research in computing is really around intelligence, and I don't know that we have made any significant strides in understanding what consciousness is.
Can computers have emotions?
What is emotion? If it is empathy, we can program empathy. Yes.
How can we program empathy into a computer?
So empathy in the sense of putting yourself in somebody else's context and thinking from a different point of view. So that's, there is a component of also feeling that. I mean, at the biological level, feeling is a chemical process. But that's not how we think about it.
I recently read that feelings are biomechanical mechanisms that all mammals use to quickly calculate probabilities of survival and reproduction. Feelings are based on pattern recognition and calculation. As such, artificially intelligent computers can arrive at feelings, or what we call intuition, based on pattern recognition and calculation. How does that strike you?
I fully understand that. And in a way, some of the thinking that I have been doing around that is in terms of learning, in terms of education, in the sense that for a long time we have focused on all of the learning that happens in a very abstract fashion. And for a long time, education has overlooked everything that is embodied. And we know that there is a very tight connection between our emotions and our learning and our motivation. So they are really not separate things. We're not left brain walking on sticks. We really are embodied beings. And in that respect, most of the progress that has been done in robotics is really that pairing of the sensing with the calculations. And as long as it's calculation in the abstract, it's very limited. But when it's combined with sensing, it becomes very powerful. And the patterns that you talk about, some of them are abstract calculations and some of them are, again, completely embodied. So I fully understand and agree with that statement.
So we may be closer to embodied computers that have very acute senses, and with it might come some breakthrough into consciousness.
Maybe, but again, I think we have always put a wall between the emotions and the thinking they are two completely different processes. And we're coming to the understanding that our bodies are intelligent, our bodies, our emotions have memories, and they dictate most of our decisions. There are very few decisions that we make that are conscious calculations.
Fatma, I want to pick up on the second value that you spoke of, which is the interplay between technology and ethics and owning it. And I want to present an argument to you that Yuval Harari, professor of history at Oxford University, has been putting forth in many of his writings, and run the elements of that argument by you and get your reaction to them. Harari recently wrote an article in The Atlantic magazine called How Artificial Intelligence Could Give Rise to Tyranny. He makes an argument about the potential devastating impact of artificial intelligence. So here are the elements of his argument. I want to present them to you one step at a time. The first assertion he makes is we are going to see an increasing divide between those who have high abstract cognitive skills and everyone else. We are headed toward an irrelevant dependent class of underemployed and unemployed routine workers, and inequity is only going to intensify and worsen. Your thoughts?
That's a concern that I share very much. There are so many urgent issues that we have not been discussing. And in a way, much of the anxiety, much of what we are seeing in society today is a reflection of those anxieties around all of the disruptions that are happening. And there are two ways to respond to these disruptions. One of them is to face them and to accept them and then to think around them. And this is where it has to be collective, communal thinking. We'll all disappear or we'll all be saved. So we cannot be me versus you. The other reaction is denial and retracting and going back to us versus them and the tribal thinking and so forth. We are facing very important issues that we really need to be facing and discussing and be open about. And this is why we felt very strongly about these values. It's very unique for a college of computing to have those as its published values. And lots of people get surprised by that. But these are urgent issues. These are very important issues, very urgent issues that we really need to be debating. This summer, I brought this topic to the discussion with my colleague deans to say, we being computing and automation, we are changing completely the face of the job market. We don't understand its full implications yet, but we know that it has major implications. And it is our responsibility as higher education institution to be thinking about that. What does it mean for us? How does that change what we do? And also, what is our role in reshaping both our educational system, our social contracts, everything. What we are realizing is the social contract that we have that is about 100 years old is no longer working, or at least it will not work in the upcoming future. We still work with the assumption that everybody will have a job. We still raise our kids and educate our students with the idea that their job is their identity. What if that's taken away from them? Who are they? And that can be devastating. And the increase in suicide, for example, is really a reflection of that. And we can all bury our head in the sand and pretend that nothing is happening and that eventually things will even out. But I don't think we should be doing that. I think we should really be addressing, debating, discussing these issues. I don't have the answer to them, but I think it's very important for us as higher education institutions to be debating these.
But you see with him statistics and information and trends showing a likely dramatic class division coming between those who have these cognitive abstract skills, who are able to use the tools of artificial intelligence and data, and everyone else who essentially can quickly become irrelevant.
The risk is there if we don't do anything about it. The risk is there if we continue, again, if we don't change our mindset, if we don't change the paradigms around which we work, and so forth. In a way, and I agree very much with his assessment that the working class used to have a leverage point. If they become irrelevant, what is their leverage point? But that argument is made with the idea that we're all competing with each other. And this is why it's very important for us to not necessarily to take it for granted that, yes, human beings are by nature competitive. That may be so, but if education doesn't change you, then education is nothing. So taking a number of things for granted and say that's how we are as human beings, it's not consistent with the concept of what education is supposed to be. Education should transform you. If it doesn't, it hasn't done anything.
Of course, the working class that he's talking about are not in your classes.
True. But then one of the questions that the universities need to ask is, who are we educating? Can we continue to be there just for the elite? And this is why one of the things that I found very appealing about UNC Charlotte is its mission of broadening access to education. And we start where we are. And I hear your point that some people don't make it there.
Fatma, the second point that Harari makes is we shouldn't fear artificial intelligence, consciousness, and independence. We should fear artificial intelligence obedience in the hands of dictators and authoritarian regimes. The science fiction scenario of artificial intelligence running amok is not the issue. The real issue is artificial intelligence doing exactly what it's told by authoritarian regimes.
Even more by authoritarian regimes. I think the blind faith on what computer systems do is something that is very dangerous. And one of the things that we're realizing fairly quickly is that we are biased. The computer system, our data is biased. The computer systems that we design will reflect those biases, will magnify them, will legitimize them. And this is why it's so important for our students, for our graduates to be very highly aware of these issues and to be thinking about that. And we have seen it over and over in computer systems that reproduce some of the prejudice that we have and create ones that weren't even there, that happen accidentally.
Harari's third point is that artificial intelligence can easily manipulate human emotions and mass opinion.
Really?
We've seen evidence of that, have we not?
Exactly. It's scary. It is scary, but also, again, we shouldn't just hide under the rug or whatever it is, but understand that there is a risk there. So what do we do? How do we design differently? How do we think differently? How do we act differently?
We will get to how education responds to these issues, but I want to continue with his argument. Mm-hmm. The next point he makes is that artificial intelligence will make centralized processing of data in autocracies more efficient than the decentralized processing of information in democracies.
Meaning the governments own the data and process it in a centralized way?
Well, he makes this argument that democracy has always had an advantage over socialism and communism because decentralized processing of information is more efficient than centralized processing of information until artificial intelligence comes along, which switches it because it makes centralized processing of information more efficient than how democracy manages information, and democracy becomes less efficient.
I know that he makes arguments that are very compelling, and I'm reading his book as well. The only level of maybe discomfort that I have is that he assumes that everything else being equal, nothing changes. We have exactly the same type of government and so forth, then we have this. But we really are at the point of major disruptions that pretty much put all of these questions on the table. What kind of governments should we have? Does it make sense to still have national governments? Does nationalism still make sense? Does work for pay still make sense? Do we need that? So I don't think that looking at a question in isolation and drawing conclusions from it makes lots of sense. We really need, and I know it's very complex to look at all of these problems at the same time. This is why I see this as a major agenda for higher education institutions, and I keep coming back to that. I think they are the only institutions that have all of the intellectual capital in all of its diversity and its depth, but also the long-term view. We don't run for election. We're not pressed to show results at the end of the quarter, at the end of the year. We have a long-term view that gives us that responsibility.
We are rapidly transferring human decision-making to algorithms.
Some, yes.
I mean, a simple example is self-driving cars, right? I mean, that's an easy way to understand how we transfer decision-making to technology.
Correct. And we end up trusting them, and then that trust is so dangerous when it does something unexpected, or that's true.
This is how Harari concludes his argument. Humans risk becoming similar to domesticated animals. As big data and artificial intelligence exponentially advance, humans are becoming less agile, less curious, and less resourceful. And he adds, we are now creating tame humans who produce enormous amounts of data and function as efficient chips in a huge data processing mechanism, but they hardly maximize their human potential. If we are not careful, we will end up with downgraded humans misusing upgraded computers to wreak havoc on ourselves and on the world. What do you make of that?
I tend to be optimistic, and I know that scenario is scary. And the way I think about it is, suppose we didn't have to work. What would we do? Would we be sitting all day? I don't think so. So we're so bound to this idea that if we didn't have a job, we wouldn't do anything. I think humans are innately curious, creative. So not having to provide food on the table is liberating in a way. And saying that if most of these tasks can be done efficiently by machines, then we will become completely useless. I don't think so. And to me, I like asking this question to people around me. If you didn't have to work, what would you do? Nobody says I would sit and do nothing.
Harari poses that question, and he raises the example of the Orthodox Jews in Israel who are supported by the state, who do not otherwise have employment, but they use their time for meaning-making. But they are supported by the state. The question becomes, what of the person who does not have employment or who is not able to work, who cannot otherwise support themselves and is not supported by the state? Yeah. What becomes of them?
Yeah. This is where we need different social contracts. When we talk about universal basic income, again, we are so used to the concept that you don't eat until you earn it, unless you earn it, and you get up in the morning with that being your task. But really, working is a 100-year-old concept. It hasn't always been the case, and if most of your basic needs are met, and met thanks to technology, then we can have much more meaningful lives. In a way, there are many people right now who spend huge proportion of their day in non-meaningful things, and wouldn't we love to allow them the luxury to do that? So yes, there is a scary scenario that's ahead of us, but it's not necessarily the only option. And we have enough agency, and we have enough, provided we face this and decide what do we want to do about it. Right now, I understand things don't look very bright. It looks like we are taking the deny and hide, but it's not the only option.
Let me present a bit more of the pessimistic view. Tim Cook, CEO of Apple, recently spoke of the data industrial complex. That data is being weaponized against people and societies. Is he right?
It is. No, he is right. And again, I'm not denying all the dangers. But I guess my main argument is with a different leadership, we can have different outcomes. With different thinking and different mindset, we can have different outcomes. And we should be moving towards that versus saying death to technology and let's stop all of it. We cannot stop its progress, but we have to figure out how do we live with it and how do we use it for good. And it does require a different way of thinking and different type of leadership, possibly different types of governments. I think Harari is the one who mentions that the tribal system at some point in history found itself inadequate, and that's when we created nation. And maybe we are at a point in time where nations are no longer adequate. Maybe we need a different governance system. And I think there is a strong argument for that.
If data is being weaponized against people and societies, is your college contributing to that weaponization?
So that's exactly our value number 2, which is we take responsibility for that. And what does it mean to take responsibility for that? It's educate, and make sure that we equip every graduate of the college with the right, again, habits of mind. We believe that they come with the right value. Everybody wants to do well, but they also give them different reflexes. We shape their priorities. We shape their way of thinking. So taking responsibility it depends on how much you put in that. We're definitely very much aware of the impact of what we do and trying to take as much responsibility as possible in changing that. It's not something that happens overnight. It's not something that happens in a day. But for example, we're creating a new curriculum in data science. Every semester, the students do projects where the ethics of what they are doing, they're asked hard questions about what's the nature of the data. Is that a legitimate question? What does that question imply? And with the idea that it becomes second nature to them. The same thing for research. We are moving towards having every thesis, every project that is presented, there has to be a chapter discussing that.
Well, you anticipated my next questions, which is, what are the questions that you want your students asking? And how is your curriculum helping students arrive at answers?
There is a motto that engineers had years ago, which is, why do you do that? I do it because I can. For us, the very important question is not, once you have established whether you can do it or not, the question is, should you do it? So we should not do something just because we can. We have to be very, very conscious of, if I do it, what does this mean? And should I do it? And if I were to do it, how do I do it? And what else do I need to do with it so that it has the impact that I want it to have?
What values do you think should guide whether someone should do what they can do?
Is this good for us as a community or not? And this is where the eco-thinking versus ego-thinking, it may help you as a person. Does it help the larger community? And I know it's not as simple as it sounds, but I think most of the time people know subconsciously that something is right or not. They are not necessarily given permission to raise these questions. So we were discussing this with former students, and a student had an aha moment. He said, oh my God, this company that I'm working with, they're asking us to collect data to find which pharmacies are not selling enough of these drugs, of these habit-forming drugs, addictive drugs. And he suddenly realized that he shouldn't be doing that and changed job after that.
Fatma, let's talk about your life. You grew up in Tunisia?
Correct.
What do you remember about your childhood in Tunisia?
I was born the year Tunisia became independent. It was a protectorate of France. So it was a time of lots of hope. The Tunisians who are of the same generation as me, I just dated myself. It's okay. All were given the same message: education, education, education is our only sole way of salvation. So there was lots of energy put into education, and that's something that I wish the momentum has stayed as strong.
And your parents, tell me about them.
So given that I was born the year of independence, my parents were both active in the movement of seeking independence, and they lived a very principled life that continues to be a very strong role model. So my dad, for example, ended up in education because he was fired from every job he held before because he was speaking up against colonization, and the only thing left then was education, and I'm so glad he did. The year Tunisia became independent, he suddenly was part of the creation of the national primary education system, and he went knocking from door to door, making sure that all kids who are of school age or who passed school age were enrolled in school. And he, in particular, insisted on girls being enrolled in school. And also, something that is unique to, he ended up heading a school, but one thing that is unique to his school is that he insisted on all kids who had some physical or mental handicap to be enrolled, whereas their parents said, oh, forget about that one. He insisted that if anybody needs education, it's them before everybody else.
Brothers or sisters?
We're 8. I'm in the middle.
As a child in Tunisia, your native language is Arabic.
Correct.
But you also learned French.
Yes. So the educational system in Tunisia, at least at that time, we start primary school. The first 3 years we study Arabic. And I don't remember now if it's the 3rd or 4th year we start French. And then as we move along in the education, more and more topics are studied in French. So by the end of our high school year, we were pretty much bilingual.
When did you begin to learn English?
In high school. I think at the end of the junior high school, you pick a 3rd language, and I picked English.
What drew you to computer science?
At the end of high school, at that time, France gave scholarships given to the top students, especially in math and physics. And I received a scholarship that year. And I went to Versailles in a pre-engineering college for 2 years. The only thing that year, I don't know if they have done that the previous years, all the women students were oriented towards agronomical engineering, and the men students went to electrical engineering. And agronomical engineering had no appeal to me. So after 2 years, I decided to give up the scholarship and go to the university.
And began studying computer science.
I was debating. I knew that I loved math, but then I figured if I study math, the only option I had is teaching, and I wasn't sure I wanted to do teaching. So one of my brothers, who was ahead of me by 3 years, said, computer science is the future, go for computer science. So that's what I did.
What early programming languages do you remember?
Pascal and Fortran.
Quite some time ago.
Yes.
You earned your Ph.D. in computing from the Pierre and Marie Curie University, now part of the Sorbonne, in the 5th District in Paris. What do you remember about Paris in the 1980s?
I love walking in Paris. The city is beautiful. And after I left Paris, every time I get a chance, I take one day, I just walk. The arts and the sculptures, I love sculptures and they're everywhere. I made lots of friends there. Living in Paris with student budget is tough. But I love visiting Paris.
You came to the United States in 1984.
Correct.
Why leave Paris for the United States?
I spent 10 years in Paris. I wanted to see what the U.S. looked like. In my mind, I was coming for just 2 years.
You left Paris for the United States, and you became a professor at Oakland University in Michigan. How did you come to Oakland University in Michigan?
So my last year in Paris, I started applying to different places in the U.S. The educational system in France and the educational system in the US are completely different. So I was pretty much shooting in the dark. I had no idea what the universities are like, how they are different, how they are the same. So I just applied to as many as I could and scheduled 5 or 6 interviews around the conference that took place in Philadelphia. And when I came to the conference, I lined up these different interviews, and some were in California, some in Michigan, some in Canada. And again, visiting all of these campuses, not even know what questions I should be asking. As it happens, my visit at Oakland, I loved the campus. The campus was beautiful. My interviewers were extremely nice. And I went home saying, that's the place I want to be in.
And you were there for over 20 years.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct.
What was that experience like for you at Oakland?
First of all, I went there with the idea that I never imagined I would stay much longer than 5-6 years. And at several points in my career, I was ready to move. But then when I was ready to move, my husband was not. When he was ready to move, I was not. We had kids. So we stayed a bit longer in one single place than we thought we would. But other than that, I have made very wonderful friends there, had several mentors, and I think about Oakland as really a very important home and a very important point in my growth in terms of my career and many other ways.
And your scholarship was primarily in what area?
Formal methods in computing, and more recently distributed computing and nature-inspired computing.
After many years, you went to Purdue University in Indiana.
In 2012, I was recruited. I had this search firm company calling me saying, we are looking for a department chair for this department. Would you consider it? Or would you recommend somebody? I said, let me think of who to recommend. He said, how about you? Would you consider it? I said, I really need maybe 1 or 2 more years. He said, just send me a resume. So I sent him a resume thinking there would be no follow-up. So he came back to me and invited me for an airport interview that then turned into a formal interview. And after the formal interview, the dean said, we will send you a plane to pick you up from which airport would you like to bring you here. This last visit is just for you. So the college had a Department of Aviation Technology. So I couldn't say no to that. Took a picture, sent it to my mom. This university sent a plane to pick me up. So when I went there as department chair, the first year we were doing our strategic planning and started to ask the question, if we want to look at education 5 years from now or 10 or 20 years from now, that we make sure to project far enough, what would it look like? Also, in the process of me, after 20 years in the same institution, knowing everything inside out, being in a completely new university, I felt like I really need to know the curriculum as much as possible. I need to know everything. So I scheduled to go to class with our students. So I spent 10 days, 2 days as freshman, 2 days as sophomore, and wanted to get as much exposure as possible to our curriculum. I told myself, if at the end of the 10 days, I don't end up with the feeling I wish I were a student again, then we have a problem. In 3 days, I figured something needs to change. And I figured there is no way this is the best that we can offer to our students. There is so much progress that has been made in the science of learning, the science of motivation, that for us to keep doing the same thing in the same way didn't make sense. Also, in the process of thinking about these problems, looking at what are the careers of the future, how are we preparing our students who will be changing career 5-6 times in their lifetime, how are we preparing them? So it raised very important questions in my mind. And also I realized that we could not answer this. This is not something that is to be done just within the scope of one department. It's bigger than that. And the dean agreed with me. And then at that time, there was a new president at Purdue, Mitch Daniels, who came and right away signaled his interest in undergraduate education and in growing access. So I thought this is a great opportunity. We submitted a proposal to him, say we would like to create a sandbox in which we experiment with a completely different way of doing the undergraduate education. He funded that and then recruited faculty who were interested in doing this. And what started out as an experiment resulted in a number of recommendations and things that then were adopted at the college level, and the college was renamed as the Purdue Polytechnic.
You also became Executive Director of the Center for Trans-Institutional Capacity Building. What is that center and what does it seek to do?
So in the process of saying we want to do education completely differently, we realized how hard these questions are, and we had to seek advice and support from several colleagues around the US who were raising similar questions. We also realized how isolating that work is, because pretty much anytime you raise these questions, you're swimming against the tide. And for us, creating that community and asking questions of students' motivation, questions of equity, questions of different ways of learning, questions of what the future is like, questions that most of them are against the status quo that make lots of people uncomfortable, and realized how much for us at the Purdue Polytechnic, having that community around us was instrumental for our being able to do anything. And as we reached out to others, there was a thirst for having that community outside of one's own administrative environment. So that's what it was. And as I handed over, in a way, the Purdue Polytechnic initiative to my colleagues, I felt like I wanted to play that role.
So here you are at Purdue doing very innovative curriculum work, addressing core issues in education and doing reinvention, and you leave again. Why did you come to UNC Charlotte?
At my 3rd or 4th year into this, as I'm talking with many of these colleagues in this community, there is a message that I kept hearing over and over, which is, if I were to do it again, here is how I would do it differently. And to me, I felt so ready to do it again. I also had a very good sense of what environment I would like to do it in, and spelled out a number of criteria that I wanted to see. And UNC Charlotte, the College of Computing and Informatics, was it. So I was ready.
Fatma, what is important to you?
Doing the right thing no matter the cost.
Thank you so much for your time today, Fatma.
Thank you so much for having me.
Fatma Mili is Dean of the College of Computing and Informatics at UNC Charlotte. She earned a bachelor's degree in computer science from the Universite Villetaneuse and a doctorate in computer science from Pierre and Marie Curie University in Paris, France. And now, a personal word. Thoughts of artificial intelligence conjure a future that is half Metropolis and half Blade Runner. We can imagine highly stylized city landscapes where the elite are served by androids and machines connected to a vast neural network of data and algorithms. We can imagine autonomous cars and smart homes and cryptocurrencies. We can imagine answering any question in any language instantly by voice command. We can imagine experiencing virtual reality and entertainment on demand, streamed from the clouds. We can also imagine all our unconscious prejudices and biases programmed into the applications we use. We can imagine corporations and governments owning the information about ourselves that we publish. We can imagine experiencing hordes of bots manipulating our emotions and behavior in our civic life and politics. We can imagine yielding the most intimate decision-making to artificial intelligence that determines what we learn, where we work, and whom we date. Of course, we do not need to imagine. All these things are true. All these things are happening. We are experiencing tectonic changes to our world. Fatma Mili is thinking deeply about computer science education. She writes, quote, "Deep down, we know that technical competence is only a piece of the puzzle. Deep down, we hope that as students acquire the technical competence, they also develop the human capacities that define an educated, thoughtful human being and citizen." Fatma and her colleagues are doing the work of examining the very purpose of education. They have defined 3 guiding values: to acknowledge inequity and commit to do everything in their power to address it, to take responsibility for the ethical implications of technology in everything they do, to value community and the well-being and sense of worth of all members. Her ambition is to ensure, quote, "graduates are equipped with outsized ears and eyes to see and hear others, outsized hearts to embrace communities, small and large, and outsized brains to ask probing questions, form independent opinions, and create innovative, sustainable solutions." So Fatma has publicly declared. Her institution and other colleges of computer science and informatics must do these things. Our future is in the balance. The day after my conversation with Fatma, I went to a presentation hosted by UNC Charlotte entitled "The Poetics of Data, a Conversation with Rafiq Anadol." Anadol is a digital media artist. He is the visionary behind Interconnected, a new public art project at Charlotte Douglas International Airport that converts 3 massive LED screens into an ever-changing digital artwork modeled on real-time airport operations data. The art installation is stunning, grand, bold, an immersion into what Anadol calls data dramatization. He is creating visual sculptural narratives of data flows that redefine space. I have gone to the airport just to look at the digital screens. I could not take my eyes off of them. They are mesmerizing. We live in the most interesting times. This is Mark Paris, and you've been listening to On Life and Meaning. Additional support for this podcast is provided by the UNC College of Arts and Architecture, celebrating a decade of creative education in the arts and design. Thank you to our funding partners, and to my teammates, Andy Go, producer of the show, and to Chris Curriton, art and media director. This is how you can help. Please write a review on iTunes. It helps us grow our audience. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter. We'd love to hear what you think about the show. and become a patron. We are on Patreon, a crowdsourcing platform that allows you to support what you value at a level you choose. Visit us also on our website on lifeandmeaning.com. Thank you for listening.